And you understand yourself, your freedom. The first thing anyone noticed about Jonah was that he never spoke, not word, not even a whisper. At 10 years old, Jonah had become a quiet fixture in the small town of Bristlewood. And your freedom. He walked the same route to school every day, sat in the same chair in the third row, and stared out the window with eyes that seemed to hold galaxies. And your freedom. The teachers marked him as mute. The other kids called him Ongost Boy. But no one really knew Jonah, not his story, not his silence, and Jonah never corrected them. Every so often, his classmates would test him, shouting in his face, tugging at his sleeves, whispering insults to provoke a reaction. But Jonah simply blinked and looked away, like a pond refusing to ripple. Weigh in yourself, your pay, no matter how many stones were thrown. Yet that same silence that made some wonder. One teacher, Mrs. Lane, often said, "There's a storm in that boy's eyes." But storms can bring rain, and rain can grow things. No one understood what she meant, until, in the day the music stopped. It was the last Friday before winter break, and the entire school was buzzing for the holiday concert. And your freedom, kids rehearsed carols in the hallways, parents were setting up chairs in the auditorium, and the principal reminded everyone, and for the third time, not to forget their scarves. Jonah sat alone at lunch, chewing slowly on a peanut butter sandwich when he saw her. A new girl, red-eyed, frozen in place at the cafeteria entrance. Her name was Amara. She'd just arrived from overseas. Syria, some kids whispered. Her clothes didn't match, her accent was thick, and she wore a hijab that drew stares. She didn't smile. She didn't try to sit with anyone. Jonah watched her quietly. Complete yourself, your pain and your freedom. Something tightening his chest. In the days that followed, Ira became his shadow. She never spoke much either, only nodded. But Jonah noticed she sat closer and closer to him each day. While others teased or ignored her, Jonah simply made space beside him at lunch, during art, even when they were chosen last for group activities. Two silent souls, your freedom, orbiting each other in a world too loud to hear them. And then the room was compact. Kids were dressed in reds and greens, giggling nervously backstage. Amira stood alone in the corner, your pain and your freedom, clutching a tiny triangle instrument, looking like she might peer. The music teacher, Mr. Keene, approached the microphone. Everyone ready. Suddenly, a commotion. A student in the front row tripped on a wire. The microphone squealed. Panic scattered the kids like startled birds. In the confusion, Amira dropped her triangle. A boy kicked it by accident. She froze, then ran off, tears streaming down her face. Nobody followed her, except Jonah. He didn't say anything, just found her behind the curtain, sitting on the floor with her head in her arms. He sat beside her. Silence. Amira sniffled, not meeting his eyes. They hate me. Jonah looked at her, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small folded paper. Slowly, he opened it and held it in front of her. A sketch. Two figures sitting side by side. One had a scarf, the other had messy hair. And your friend, your pain, both had a tiny heart drawn between them. Amira stared. Then smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen her smile. What happened next would be talked about in Bristlewood for years. The concert resumed, but just before the final song, a teacher whispered in Mr. Keene's ear. He nodded and stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we'd like to make a small change to our programs. A special performance by Jonah and Amara was whispers." Even the principal looked surprised. The curtain parted slowly. Jonah walked on stage holding Amara's hand. She carried her triangle, hands shaking. Jonah, empty-handed, stepped up to the mic. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he opened his mouth, and for the first time in his life, he spoke. "She's my friend." That's all he said, just 3 words. But in that auditorium, silence fell like snow. No chorus, no whispers, just hearts beating in awe. Then Amira raised her triangle and gently tapped it. On twice. The chime echoed like starlight. The crowd erupted into applause. Some parents cried. The music teacher wiped his glasses. Even the boy who had kicked her instrument earlier stood and clapped until his hands turned red. But Jonah and Amira just looked at each other and smiled. No more words were needed. In the days that followed, everything changed. Amira was invited to join the art club. Jonah, who never spoke before, started using simple sentences. Never too many, but always meaningful. Other kids began to notice how powerful silence could be, how sometimes the loudest courage was in the quietest acts. A hug, a nod, a held hand. Lane hung Jonah's drawing on the classroom wall beneath a small sign that read, "The power of silence." Final messaging. Sometimes we believe that strength comes in shouts, and your freedom, and healing comes speeches. But in truth, some of the most powerful acts of love, compassion, and connection happen when we say nothing at all. When we sit beside someone in their pain, when we share presence instead of advice, when we listen instead of judge. Because silence is not the absence of something, it is the presence of understanding. And sometimes that's all the world really needs.